The Raspberry Pi software configuration tool, known as raspi-config, is a setup utility for Raspbian used to make the most common configuration changes via a simple menu-driven interface. A majority of the configuration changes result in automated edits to config.txt and other standard Linux configuration files. Some options require a reboot to take effect. This video describes all the available options in detail.
Raspbian Jessie now includes a desktop version of the Raspberry Pi configuration tool, which provides much the same functionality as raspi-config, just with a graphical user interface. However, that version is not covered in this video.
For the regularly updated companion article for this video, please visit www.lowfamily.com.au/pi. Before you start, make sure you have the latest version of raspi-config installed, using the following commands.
Sudo apt-get update &&, sudo apt-get install raspi-config-y.
Launch raspi-config from the command line, using the following command.
Sudo raspi-config.
Raspi-config can be used from the local console, or remotely via SSH, which is enabled by default.
Expand file system. If you installed Raspbian using the NUPS installer, then you can ignore this section, as the file system was expanded automatically during installation. However, if you imaged Raspbian directly to an SD card yourself, then part of the card will be unused. This can be any amount over 3 GB.
Choosing this option will expand your installation to fill the rest of the SD card. You will need to reboot the Raspberry Pi to make this space available. Note there is no confirmation. Selecting the option begins the partition expansion immediately.
From the main menu, select Expand File System and press Enter.
The root partition has been resized, and the file system will be enlarged upon the next reboot.
Press Enter. Change user password.
Use this option to change the default user password. The default user is Pi. The default password is Raspberry.
From the main menu, select Change User Password and press Enter.
You will now be asked to enter a new password for the Pi user.
Press Enter. Type a new password for the Pi user and press Enter. Retype the new password for the Pi user and press Enter.
The password for the Pi user has been changed successfully.
Press Enter. Boot options.
Use this option to change the user interface the Raspberry Pi presents when it boots.
From the main menu, select Boot options and press Enter.
The four available boot options are:
Console.
Provides a text console, and requires a user to log in before they can access the system.
Console Auto Login.
Provides a text console, and the system is automatically logged into as the Pi user.
Desktop.
Provides a desktop graphical user interface, and requires a user to log in before they can access the system.
Desktop Auto Login.
Provides a desktop graphical user interface, and the system is automatically logged into as the Pi user. The default boot option for Raspbian Jessie is Desktop Auto Login. The default boot option for Raspbian Jessie Lite is Console. The Raspbian Jessie Lite distribution does not include a pre-installed desktop graphical user interface. If you want to use the desktop boot options with Raspbian Jessie Lite, you will first need to install LiteDM using the following package install command.
Sudo apt-get install LiteDM-y.
The console boot options are best suited for remote or server operations, whilst the desktop boot options are best suited for graphical operations using a locally attached display.
Select the desired boot option and press Enter. Wait for network at boot.
Use this option to force the boot process to wait for a network connection to be established before completing, but at the cost of longer boot times.
From the main menu, select Wait for network at boot and press Enter.
The two Wait for network at boot options are:
Fast.
Boot without waiting for the network connection to be established.
Slow.
Wait for the network connection to be established before completing boot. The default Wait for network at boot option is Fast.
Select the desired Wait for network at boot option and press Enter. Internationalization options.
This option is used to choose your language, character set, time zone, and keyboard layout.
From the main menu, select Internationalization options and press Enter. Change locale.
This option is used to set up your language and region settings to match your location.
From the Internationalization options menu, select Change locale and press Enter. Add and/or remove locales to be generated for use with the system.
The default system locale is English, Great Britain, UTF-8.
Press Enter. Select the desired system default locale and press Enter. Change time zone.
This option is used to set up your time zone to match your location.
From the Internationalization options menu, select Change time zone and press Enter.
The default time zone is UTC.
Select the geographic area in which you live, and press Enter. Select the city or region corresponding to your time zone, and press Enter. Change keyboard layout.
This option is used to set up your keyboard layout to match your keyboard.
From the Internationalization options menu, select Change keyboard layout, and press Enter.
The default keyboard type is determined automatically at boot.
Select the keyboard model of your keyboard, and press Enter. Select the keyboard layout of your keyboard, and press Enter. Select the Alt-GR modifier key for your keyboard, and press Enter. Select the Compose key for your keyboard, and press Enter. Enable camera.
If you have a Raspberry Pi camera module, you will need to enable support for it through this option. Enabling camera support will also ensure that at least 128 megabytes of memory is dedicated to the graphics processing unit.
From the main menu, select Enable Camera, and press Enter.
Camera support is disabled by default.
Select Enable to turn on camera support. Select Disable to turn off camera support. Press Enter. Add to RaspTrack.
RaspTrack was set up by enthusiast Ryan Walmsley in 2012 as a way of tracking where people are using Raspberry Pis around the world. The site is a user-contributed Google map, to which Pi users in the community have added their location. It shows a heat map of where Pi users are known to be around the world.
From the main menu, select Add to RaspTrack, and press Enter.
RaspTrack, http://rastrack.co.uk, is a website run by Ryan Walmsley for tracking where people are using Raspberry Pis around the world. If you have an internet connection, you can add yourself directly using this tool. This is just a bit of fun, not any sort of official registration.
Press Enter. Enter a RaspTrack username or nickname, and press Enter. Enter a registration email address, and press Enter. Press Enter. Overclock.
The Raspberry Pi supports simple software-based overclocking, and using an overclock preset through raspi-config does not void your warranty.
From the main menu, select Overclock, and press Enter.
Be aware that overclocking may reduce the lifetime of your Raspberry Pi. If overclocking at a certain level causes system instability, try a more modest overclock. Hold down Shift during boot to temporarily disable overclock. See http://elinux.org/rpi_overclocking for more information.
Press Enter.
The available overclock presets are
None.
This preset provides the default clock settings for the Raspberry Pi. The preset is not intended for use with the Raspberry Pi 2 or Raspberry Pi 0.
Modest.
This preset provides modest overclock settings for the Raspberry Pi by increasing the speed of the CPU to 800 MHz. The preset is not intended for use with the Raspberry Pi 2 or Raspberry Pi Zero.
Medium.
This preset provides medium overclock settings for the Raspberry Pi by increasing the speed of the CPU to 900 MHz, the SD-RAM to 450 MHz, and increasing the power by 2 volts to help stability. The preset is not intended for use with the Raspberry Pi 2 or Raspberry Pi Zero.
High.
This preset provides high overclock settings for the Raspberry Pi by increasing the speed of the CPU to 950 MHz, the SD-RAM to 450 MHz, and increasing the power by 6 volts to help stability. The preset is not intended for use with the Raspberry Pi 2 or Raspberry Pi Zero.
Turbo.
This preset provides turbo overclock settings for the Raspberry Pi by increasing the speed of the CPU to 1000 MHz, the core to 500 MHz, the SD-RAM to 600 MHz, and increasing the power by 6 volts to help stability. In addition, this preset uses dynamic overclocking and overvoltage control, applying turbo when busy and limiting turbo when the CPU temperature reaches 85 degrees Celsius, meaning there should be no measurable reduction in the lifetime of your Raspberry Pi. The preset is not intended for use with the Raspberry Pi 2 or Raspberry Pi Zero.
Pi 2.
This preset provides overclock settings for the Raspberry Pi 2 by increasing the speed of the CPU to 1000 MHz, the core to 500 MHz, the SD-RAM to 500 MHz, and increasing the power by 2 volts to help stability. The preset is not intended for use with the original model Raspberry Pi or Raspberry Pi Zero.
Select the desired overclock preset and press Enter. Advanced options.
This option contains a sub-menu of advanced Raspberry Pi settings.
From the main menu, select Advanced Options and press Enter. Overscan.
This option enables or disables the black border around the screen image that can be used to correct an image that spills off the side of the display. Modern televisions and monitors do not need overscan enabled. Changes to this option will only take effect after a reboot.
From the Advanced Options menu, select Overscan and press Enter.
Overscan is enabled by default.
Select Enable to turn on overscan support. Select Disable to turn off overscan support. Press Enter. Hostname.
This option allows you to set the visible name for this Raspberry Pi on the network.
From the Advanced Options menu, select Hostname and press Enter.
Please note, RFCs mandate that a host name's labels may contain only ASCII letters A through Z, case insensitive, the digit 0 through 9, and the hyphen. Host name labels cannot begin or end with a hyphen. No other symbols, punctuation characters, or blank spaces are permitted.
Press Enter.
The default host name is Raspberry Pi.
Type your preferred host name and press Enter. Memory split.
Memory on the Raspberry Pi is shared between the Central Processing Unit, or CPU, and the Graphics Processing Unit, or GPU. This option sets how much memory the GPU receives, with the CPU receiving the remainder.
From the Advanced Options menu, select Memory Split and press Enter.
The default memory split is 64 megabytes. The minimum memory split is 16 megabytes. The minimum memory split with camera support enabled is 128 megabytes. Setting GPU memory to low values may automatically disable certain firmware features, as there are some things the GPU simply can't do with too little memory. So if a certain feature you're trying to use isn't working, try setting a larger GPU memory split.
Type a valid amount of memory to allocate to the GPU in megabytes, and press Enter. SSH.
This option allows you to enable or disable remote command line access to your Raspberry Pi, using Secure Shell, or SSH, on TCP port 22.
From the Advanced Options menu, select SSH, and press Enter.
SSH is enabled by default. Enabling SSH allows you to remotely access the command line of the Raspberry Pi from another device on your network, without the need for a locally attached keyboard or display. Disabling SSH ensures the service does not start on boot, freeing up a small amount of processing resources. If connecting your Raspberry Pi directly to a public network, you should disable SSH unless you have set up secure passwords for all users.
Select Disable to turn off the SSH server. Select Enable to turn on the SSH server. Press Enter.
The SSH server will be enabled or disabled, depending on your selection.
Press Enter. Device tree.
This option allows you to enable or disable the device tree to manage resource allocation and module loading. This alleviates the problem of multiple drivers contending for system resources, and to allow head modules to be auto-configured.
From the Advanced Options menu, select Device Tree, and press Enter.
The device tree is enabled by default.
Select No to disable the device tree. Select Yes to enable the device tree. Press Enter.
The device tree will be enabled or disabled, depending on your selection.
Press Enter. SPI.
This option allows you to enable or disable the Serial Peripheral Interface, or SPI, and control automatic loading of the corresponding kernel module needed to support products, such as PiFace. SPI allows you to connect a 4-wire serial link to sensors, memory and peripheral devices.
From the Advanced Options menu, select SPI, and press Enter.
SPI is disabled by default.
Select No to disable SPI. Select Yes to enable SPI. Press Enter.
If you chose to enable SPI, you will be prompted whether you would like the SPI kernel module to be loaded by default.
Select No to disable the SPI kernel module. Select Yes to enable the SPI kernel module. Press Enter.
The SPI kernel module will be enabled or disabled, depending on your selection.
Press Enter. I2C.
This option allows you to enable or disable the Inter-Integrated Circuit, or I2C, and automatic loading of the corresponding kernel module needed to support I2C devices.
From the Advanced Options menu, select I2C, and press Enter.
I2C is disabled by default.
Select No to disable I2C. Select Yes to enable I2C. Press Enter.
I2C will be enabled or disabled after a reboot, depending on your selection.
Press Enter.
If you chose to enable I2C, You will be prompted whether you would like the I2C kernel module to be loaded by default.
Select No to disable the I2C kernel module. Select Yes to enable the I2C kernel module. Press Enter.
The I2C kernel module will be enabled or disabled, depending on your selection.
Press Enter. Serial.
This option allows you to enable or disable shell and kernel messages on the serial connection. Disable this option if you wish to use the serial port for your own purposes.
From the Advanced Options menu, select Serial and press Enter.
Serial is enabled by default.
Select No to disable Serial. Select Yes to enable Serial. Press Enter.
Serial will be enabled or disabled, depending on your selection.
Press Enter. Audio.
The Raspberry Pi has two audio output devices: a HDMI digital output, and a 3.5mm headphone jack analog output. This option allows you to select the preferred audio output.
From the Advanced Options menu, select Audio and press Enter.
Audio is set to auto by default.
Select Force 3.5mm headphone jack to use analog audio output only. Select Force HDMI to use digital audio output only. Select Auto to automatically determine the audio output device. Press Enter. Update.
This option asks raspi-config to update itself to the latest version. This may take several minutes to complete, at which point raspi-config will restart.
From the Advanced Options menu, select Update and press Enter. About raspi-config.
This option displays information about this configuration tool.
From the main menu, select About raspi-config and press Enter.
This tool provides a straightforward way of doing initial configuration of the Raspberry Pi. Although it can be run at any time, some of the options may have difficulties if you have heavily customized your installation.
Press Enter. Finish.
Use Finish to exit raspi-config.
From the main menu, select Finish and press Enter.
If you have made a configuration change that requires your Raspberry Pi to be restarted, you will be asked if you would like to reboot now.
Select No to exit raspi-config without rebooting. Select Yes to exit raspi-config and reboot immediately. Press Enter. That concludes this instructional video guide on raspi-config. Thank you for watching.
For the regularly updated companion article for this video, please visit www.lowfamily.com.au/pi.